Hello everyone. I'm about to get on a bus to Boston, but not yet. This is Witchhassle. Let's get to work. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Witchhassle, a show talking to practitioners and scholars about the work of witchcraft and finding answers to listener questions about all things magic, occult, witchy, and wild-eyed. I'm your host, Cooper Wilhelm, and we have a really big show for you today. It's mostly going to be taken up by my conversation with Chiron Armand. Chiron Armand pops in to chat about shamanism, spiritual healing, and hoodoo. It was a really, really lovely conversation. But before that, we have a treat in what will be hopefully a fortnightly feature of the show. Astrologer Frank Sivilli is going to give a sense of what the astrological weather is going to be for the coming weeks, and some good elections for magicians out there looking to make their magic in line with the activities of the cosmos. Here's Frank.
Hey Cooper, hey all. I'm Frank Sivilli. I'm an astrologer, a witch, a poet, and a diviner based out of Queens, New York, and I'm here to give you some guidance and some elections for working the stars in the weeks ahead. I do Hellenistic and archetypal astrology, I use whole sign houses, and I work with the tropical zodiac. It's also worth noting that all of my elections will be from New York City and in Eastern Time. So let's look at the stars. The big event of the next few weeks, and really the year ahead in general, is going to be Jupiter's ingress into Capricorn on Tuesday, December 3rd, where he'll be joining Venus, Saturn, Pluto, and the south node of the moon. We're coming off a very strong Jupiter year. He's been in Sagittarius, and that's a sign that he rules. You could think of rulership as if Sagittarius is the home or seat of Jupiter as king. When you're in your own home, you can rule freely. Contrary to this past year, though, Jupiter's move into Capricorn is going to signal some less than joyful happenings. Jupiter is in his fall in Capricorn. This is one of the least auspicious conditions for a planet to find itself in. It means conflict and futility and impotence. So I don't recommend that you try to do any big Jupiter workings once he makes his ingress on the 3rd, because the effort it takes to get the work done is going to be far out of proportion to the boons you might hope for, if any you actually do end up seeing. What I can say, what I do recommend, is that while Jupiter is still in Sagittarius, you should create yourself a small talisman if you haven't already. This should be a talisman that can buoy you through the personal turmoils you may face in the year ahead. So let's take a look at how to get that done. On Sunday, December 1st, wake up at sunrise, which is about 7:04 a.m. Eastern Time. The sun will be just peeking over the horizon on the ascendant at 8 degrees of Sagittarius. Jupiter will still be in Sagittarius, and the moon will be sextile the sun and ascendant in Aquarius. This is not the greatest Jupiter election of the past year, but for the time we have left, it'll do. And a word to the wise, do not use this for financial workings. Create the ritual how you see fit. If you need some inspiration, some symbols to include might be fire, the Sagittarius glyph, Jupiter and the sun's planetary glyphs, the colors blue or purple, sapphire, juniper, nutmeg, calendula, oak, dirt from banks, churches, or courthouses, things in groups of 4, or ritual actions performed in 4s. And you can throw in whatever else you see fit to craft the ritual. Take some physical object that's symbolic or emblematic of some of the easy luck and fire-hearted adventures you may have had this past year. This is going to serve as your talisman. So perform the rite as you see fit, and try to time it such that you're reaching the crux of the work just at sunrise. Once you have your talisman, you can work with it on Thursdays or on Sunday nights, and be sure to feed it and nourish it regularly in a suitably Jupiterian manner. So again, this is that last chance to get some good Jupiter in Sagittarius moxie that you can perform on Sunday, December 1st, 2019 at 7:04 a.m. Eastern. So now I want to move on to one more election that I found for the weeks ahead. This will be for some destruction. It's a Mars working. And with Mars in Scorpio still, he's one of the few planets in good condition that I personally don't see enough people taking advantage of. And perhaps that's my Aries sun, but I do see that as a real shame. Just a word of caution when it comes to Mars work, please be careful not to burn yourself. As always, protection, grounding, and focus is key. I'm going to recommend this working in 2 parts. This is an election that you can use to work with some of the inferior spirits of Mars, or generally Martian things, beings, or institutions. Do not shoot for the deity himself. This is a work of the sublunar. On Friday, December 6th at 11:46 p.m., you'll find Gemini ascendant with Mercury and Mars in Scorpio in the 3rd house, and the moon in Aries in the 8th house. This is a good time to begin the working. So you want to set up your altar or workspace and mark some official commencement to the working. Drop 5 stolen coins in a darkened still of water, perhaps, and calm your mind. Then, at 1 a.m., you'll want to begin the working proper. 1 a.m. begins the hour of Mars, and seeing as this is a working with Martian spirits on the night of Mars, that's what you're looking for. I like this chart because the moon is waxing, so it's good for progressive works. I like that the moon is trine the sun, both of which are in fire signs. The luminaries see each other and lend their fire to your work. I'm not going to go over exactly what to do here. If you're familiar with spirit work, you can fill in the blanks and work accordingly. I will say, though, that the spirits seem poised to do some quick and dirty destruction at this time. I wouldn't be surprised if some angry dead show up as well, so do be careful to channel them appropriately and avoid unintended consequences. This is a good election to hurl some of the Scorpion's venom at institutions that you really dislike. Give the dead and the spirits of Mars somewhere to unleash and target their poison. When you're finished, leave an offering of a donation to a hospital or health-focused charity of your choice. And of course, you'll want to perform a ritual bath and do some divination to keep yourself on course. And that's all I've got for you. So be safe out there. Know you're not alone. You can find me on Instagram at anti.bishop for commentary or questions. And until next time, be well.
For that deeply informative look at the astrology of the weeks ahead. If you want to check out Frank's Instagram, he's at anti.bishop, and his astrological suggestions and analysis will become a regular feature of the show, appearing fortnightly, so look out for that. Very exciting. It seems wonderfully fitting that after Thanksgiving, which, if you ignore its legacy of colonial genocide, or at least its association with that legacy, is, a big Jupiterian holiday, because it's ostensibly about bounty and plenty, and it happens on Thursday every year, and Thursday is Jupiter's day. So it seems very fitting that after that big Jupiterian moment, Jupiter's going to be going into some kind of retirement or diminished exile. Fun. Up next, we have my conversation with Chiron Armand. Chiron is well-versed in a number of traditions, including hoodoo, kimbanda, voodoo, and we had a lovely conversation about shamanism, healing, and dance, and it was just an absolute joy. Here's my talk with Chiron. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I'm a huge fan of the stuff you say on that platform, which is fun for me because most of Twitter is me getting upset about politics, and now it's like there's also good things on there, which is fun.
I also get upset about politics there.
So you are initiated in kimbanda, voodoo. You've worked under conjure and root workers in the American South. You are initiated in the unnamed path shamanism, I'm led to understand. So you're versed in such a wide array of things. How did this all, what was the access point for you at first?
Well, I'll correct you. I'll correct you there. I would not say that I've studied under root workers in the South. I studied under people who've studied under root workers in the South, and I always feel the need to really make that correction because there's so much jockeying for authenticity in this field. So I like to be really explicit. I didn't grow up on my granny's lap with her putting people's names in frying pans. Like, that would have been cool, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So is like, I'm not Haitian, but yes, I am Ungan in Haitian Vodou. I'm not Brazilian, but I am Macumbero in Kimbanda. And I am in the unnamed path, which I consider to be a shamanic witchcraft tradition. And then I have some other weird stuff going on, shamanism-wise. It really started with, when you ask where did this all begin, do you mean my whole path to begin with, or this weird doors opening to these traditions?
I think really just your path in general, because I feel like that presumably came before you started seeking out these traditions, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say I really started seeking them out. They were really like seeking me. I sought out the unnamed path because I was in college. I had been studying. I had been reading a lot of gay archetypal psychology from the 1970s, and I was trying to understand how queer people were seen in different cultures. I had a tarot deck. I was doing a bit of stuff with trance and herbalism and spell work, but somehow I came across the podcast of Eddie Gutierrez, the founder and the late founder of the Unnamed Path. And I was like, oh my God, there's a living tradition of queer men who are, trying some stuff and speak to the unique gifts of people. That's cool. And that I studied the Unnamed Path with him for a couple of years, but and really a huge door for me was the fact that he himself was studying hoodoo under Cat Ironwood and had just started his practice conjure doctor. And when I graduated from college, it was into the recession and I couldn't find a job in humanities. And I remember, I had never had, I'd given tarot readings to people. And this is what I think that, this is why I get really frustrated when people do not honor the uniqueness and beauty of the tradition known as hoodoo or conjure or root work. This tradition, as far as diagnostic traditions go in America, this is what we've got. This is what we've got. It's a huge difference between, I don't know, the Hierophant is when you feel good sometimes about religious ideas versus some bitches going at your mom. It's fucking up your money. Like, take this unjinxing back. And the dilution makes me livid. So I had never had a reading with someone who was trained to diagnose and prescribe anything. That was a totally new idea, but I was just like, you're my teacher in this other tradition. I think I need your help. And he threw some cards for me, and he put on, he deepened his voice a little bit because he was, going into his own root worker mode. I love that man so much. God bless him. May he rest in power. And he threw the cards, and he said, you've got to do some uncrossing baths. I had never done anything like that before. And he said, but also you're looking for a job, and it's not going to work out because you're supposed to be doing this. I was reading cards for people and prescribing. I was like, what? You're stupid. You're crazy. And beginning to learn under him, I became connected to the current, it still exists, the readers and the Association of Independent Readers and Root Workers, and I was a part of that group for a while, and that was really the door that connected me to some other people who were connected to some other traditions, and certain things started falling in place and making sense.
So that's really, I'm so glad you bring this up, because I feel like a lot of times when people talk about magic broadly understood, right? Including people who just think crystals make them happy or something like that, all the way to, Solomonic, this and that. This idea that you would go for a real diagnosis and for a practical solution to the problem that you're dealing with. I feel like that's something that hoodoo has that a lot of other traditions don't necessarily, or at least a lot of people don't seek out necessarily in America.
Well, I would say that in our European-derived magical traditions, we don't have it as much. If we think about Neo-Wicca or Alexandrian, or even, I don't know, perhaps we find it a little bit in some of the reclaimed Solomonic stuff. Yeah. I think that persons who are engaged in that path often at least have some kind of a sense of, because you're dealing with such heavy artillery. If you're not doing some kind of cleansings, then you're just, an ass, you're just an idiot. And obviously, traditions like Vodou and Kimbanda, it is through the African and American Indian connections that we've retained, I would say, a certain, and this is where I'm going to really fuck myself up, shamanic healing. This is where we retain a certain shamanic healing perspective that we find in the folk traditions. And obviously, I'm not well versed in, the Appalachian tradition. I know that, this is retained in some folk-derived European. I'm just not that familiar with them, and they're just not as popular right now because everyone wants black things.
Okay, so this is really interesting. So, when you talk about this idea of, shamanic healing, I think a lot of people would not be super familiar with what that really means. They probably have heard the word shaman before, but don't really understand a sort of operative definition of that word. How would you sort of define the work of a shaman? What does a shaman do? Well,
I would say that we are far more interested in our ideas about what a shaman does versus what a shaman is. And what a shaman is far more important than what a shaman does, because as my colleague, Anomalous Thracian, would say, the issue of what a shaman is a human rights issue. A person who, first of all, the word shaman is very, very difficult and tangential. We're talking about a very specific word. We're talking about the Buryat people of North Asia, and a word that they use to describe a certain kind of person. A person who somewhere in their life, usually sometime during their youth, they are plucked out of society because they are murdered by a helping spirit of theirs who, if they get through this initiatory illness or shaman sickness, then they are somewhat returned to the tribe, but now they are laden with obligations and taboos. Sure, they might have some cool new powers, but they are not so much a human anymore. They are in a different class of persons. And this class of persons that they are part of is actually hugely reliant upon the community for help with a lot of basic tasks. So there's that connection between, and in exchange for that help, they are able to help the community be in, right balance and help cure things, et cetera, et cetera. Anthropologists took this word and applied this word to a certain class of people they find all around the world. So to me, a shaman is not a person necessarily who has trained in shamanic healing practices. I think that person might be a shamanic practitioner. Even in Korea, you have a shamanist, someone who has learned certain techniques and practices to be able to help. But to me, and a shaman is someone who has been murdered, who has been murdered by a helping spirit or a deity, and if they make it through what is often a period of years of initiatory illness, also known as shaman sickness, if they are able to heal themselves, then that person comes in. So to me, I have a sort of a personal rubric, and not everyone's going to agree with it, but that to me is what a shaman is. Someone who's been murdered by a spirit and now has this sort of role in the world. To me, when it comes to the word shamanic healing, also difficult, because I think that a lot of things are shamanic. I view the world through a shamanic lens. I think that when someone lights an uncrossing candle in the hoodoo tradition, that's a kind of shamanic healing, whether or not they're a shaman. I think that, shamanic healing to me is working with a broader and vaster knowledge of the connections between things than we usually find either in allopathic medicine or even in folk traditions, to bring balance and restore wholeness to individuals, spaces, environments, and family lines.
So you...
and I would say,
yeah, go ahead, please.
A distinction I'm making, for instance, between, shamanic and folk traditions is, I think that, a lot of people might approach folk magic in the sense of, I know this plant does this thing. I know basil protects, and that's great. And basil is a wonderful protector. And to me, a more shamanic perspective is, who is basil? Who is this plant? what perspective does this plant carry? Why is the plant protected? So if this plant is protective, and so is Angelica root, and so is this other thing, what are, the recognizing of personage in each?
That's really interesting. So when you work with, say, preparing, let's say, like a cleansing bath or something like that, how much do you feel like, so would it feel like you're not necessarily gathering a group of ingredients for a purpose, but really working with a series of identities or a series of
Absolutely.
Okay, and so is there like a more communicatory practice in that? Is it sort of, like asking for help?
Absolutely.
Or okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I made a bath earlier, and each ingredient is, I'm asking, how much of you do I put in this? Sometimes plants will say, we're cool, but you also really need this other plant. Plants will refer you to other plants. Yeah, absolutely. Communication is hugely a part of it.
On your website, you mentioned that you work with helping spirits, though maybe work with might not be the best way to phrase it. What is your relationship with helping spirits, and do you feel like your initiation into help, like having a connection with them, was similar to this idea of being murdered by spirits?
Oh yeah, sure, for sure. Any initiatory process that you go through is supposed to be a rewiring. If you initiate into a tradition like Vodou, if you go to what the process is known as Kanzo, part of that process is you're being rewired to better channel that energy through you. A lot of, to me, initiatory process is about, whatever kind of initiatory process we go through, is about expanding capacity. So, sure, the Loa had shown up for me, over years in my life. I dated a guy in college, and he showed me his business card, and I was like, oh, that's Zilli's Veve on it. Like little synchronicities, but I was never able to talk with them, like, in a very, very versatile way that now I have that capacity for. Absolutely, the initiations I've been through that have been spirit-induced have been about that spirit killing me to make me something new, and something new being something that has a broadened capacity to carry and channel them.
Were all of these initiations that you've undergone, were they ones that you, I feel weird using the same word twice, are they ones you initiated? Like, did you sort of decide, I'm going to do this, and then you open the door and then something comes through? Or were they ones where you were minding your own business and then suddenly something decided, no, you're part of this now?
The latter.
Okay.
Absolutely the latter. Yeah, there's, Vodou was something that was knocking at my door for a long time, and then the synchronicities were strong, and I actually had a reading with a mambo, and I was like, I think I'm supposed to get initiated in Vodou, but something, something weird is happening. I never have the money. Her reading was like, well, you have this other spirit who really is blocking it. And it turned out that spirit wasn't supposed to be in my life. And once that was resolved, the door, like the floodgates opened for me to enter the tradition. I think that's usually how it is with initiating into a tradition under someone else's hand. There's often a choice involved, not all the time, because there are totally stories of people, for instance, needing to initiate into Santeria because of life or death reasons. But there's usually a choice involved. I'm sure people will absolutely, lay prostrate before a spirit or a deity and say, take me, or, move something. That wasn't my experience, though. My experience with the spirit initiations that I've gone through have been non-consensual.
Once you've undergone one of these sorts of initiations that you feel, is one that you did not choose and it's sort of been chosen for you in this way, is there ever a sense that you want to try to undo it or go back? Has there ever been a sense of regret or even...
I'm big on dying well. I've gone through enough of spirit initiatory stuff to know that if I'm in it, then I just have to die. And that means like cleansing and sleeping a lot and allowing whatever insanity I'm going through mentally to just happen, and asking what needs to be done, like what actions do I need to be taking to move through this? What do I need to be letting go of? what stories about my identity and ego to let go of. Yeah, so it's never like on the other side of it, I'm like, oh shit, I hate my life. I wish I could undo all of that. Like, on the other side of that kind of experience, you're like, thank God I lived.
Yeah.
Thank God I lived and didn't like do something stupid. I guess cumulatively, absolutely, I often am like, oh wow, like not having gone through all of this to begin with would have been great.
Yeah, fair. You bring up the sort of cleansing and things that would need to happen on a daily basis in that kind of experience. How important is, I know this is going to sound like a big, stupid, obvious question, but I really want to get like your thoughts on it. So I'm just, like, let's start with the big, obvious thing. How important is spiritual cleansing?
So hugely important. And I think that, I have a theory, and my theory, without trying to necessarily idolize traditional cultures, but I think that so much of what we see when we're thinking about communal rituals, communal grief rituals, initiation into adulthood, we're jumping over the fire on St. John's Day. So many of these actions, I think, are about maintaining this container of community made up of smaller containers of individuals who are accomplishing some task or goal, which is, continuing the energy of the ancestors moving through, this land and moving through us, these gifts of knitting and weaving and music and drumming. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to limit the energy, our vulnerability to energetic intrusion, because there's weird demons in the underworld, and there's weird things in the forest, and there's weird things on the mound, and there's all these weird things, and sure, they get in sometimes, and Mary doesn't know why her cow isn't producing milk anymore, and the shaman has to remove a blah 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 spirit from the 3-year-old, and like these things do get through, but there are things in place, whether it's a fairy doctor or a medicine person, to help, stand guard at that threshold of the community and maintain those things. We don't have any of that. We don't have proper funeral rites. We're not living well. We're not dying well. Our dead aren't moving on. We're not jumping over fires and communally cleansing. We're not grieving. We're not doing anything. We're just stagnant and accumulating. So spiritual cleansing is really important.
Right.
So individual, personal spiritual cleansing is huge, because I think that we are utterly possessed. We are utterly possessed.
So the average person, say, who hasn't been, I don't know, summoning Baphomet on a regular basis for this and that, like someone who just sort of is going about their day, riding bicycles and whatever it is that people do on a normal day. I don't know what people
hopefully
like.
Eating quiche.
What was that?
Hopefully eating quiche.
Yeah, people who are eating quiche and having a lovely time, they're probably still, you would suspect, like deeply embedded with like spiritual gunk or spirits, a mixture of the two. Yeah. Okay, so this isn't just like this isn't just like a when you do something dirty, clean yourself off. It's just being in the world is gonna cover you in stuff. Being in the world, and also being as traumatized as we are, we're all ridiculously traumatized. A number of cultures have, practices related to the idea of soul loss, the idea that a piece of the human being will break off in a moment of trauma and say, I can't do this anymore. And we just keep going, and the Quran Buddhismo tradition, it's called susto, various ways of, you find, frankly, a good compendium of soul loss, soul retrieval practices really need to be written, because you find it all around the world. And, where there is a vacuum, the nature abhors it. So something's going to go in you. And, we're not, when I say possessed, I don't mean we're all vomiting and our heads are turning 360, but I just mean that our vulnerability, I believe that our vulnerability to intrusive energies is perhaps at an all-time high. Okay. And I'm glad you bring up that idea of nature abhorring a vacuum, because I think it's an important distinction, because I think some people, their spiritual practice, like I clean myself, and my natural state is that of a positive, blessed thing, and so if I clean myself, I'm good to go. But I feel like that is not your stance. It's more like you need to clean and then do something on top of that as you move forward. Is that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, even, after I do a cleansing bath, the first thing I do is I anoint myself with, some kind of an intentional oil or something to replace that layer. Really, we're talking about layers here. I might be in a, in the word, and as root work would use the word condition, I might do some divination right now, and it might be like, you're in a really good condition. Does it mean I'm a perfect person? No. Does it mean that under the onion layers, there might be entities from past lives I haven't dealt with yet? There might be something that came in when I was 4 and my mom left me alone and I cried. That doesn't mean that, but it kind of means right now you're fine on the surface. In a way like that, at least that's how I approach divination, because we're not going to get all of this done. We're talking about peeling these layers back, and as we're peeling them back, well, sure, we might be, uncovering things under the surface, soul loss that has led to certain kinds of entity intrusion, past life issues that might have weird contracts associated with them. You are really, really, really committed to cutting out people's hearts in a lifetime and feeding them to the pyramid, But hopefully, as those things are uncovered and dealt with, what's also being uncovered is your own will and aspects of your own will that you didn't even know you didn't really have access to.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like this idea that this kind of cleansing can help you get at the sort of the root part of you before it is, filtered through the 1,000 prisms of past lives and trauma and possession and so on.
Sure. And even the most basic salt with some water bath that, is that removed last week, just haven't felt great since. She's going through a lot. And then you're like, hey, Chiron and Armand talking about spiritual cleansing. Let me just put some sea salt and water and pour it over myself. Even that is a renewal of will. There was a certain level of gunk, of emotional gunk. I'm not saying don't hold space for your friends, but right. I'm just saying like, all of these acts of cleansing and removal of what is not us, from the most simple and everybody knows it to the deeper, weird puzzle-like pieces, all of these are so that there's more you.
That is really lovely. So my understanding is you help folks a lot with things like issues involving past lives, issues involving ancestral sort of influences. Could you talk a little bit about that? Unless I'm wrong. Then you can just not talk about it, because if I'm wrong, that's fine too.
Well, you're right. The past life stuff kind of pisses me off, only because even I, when I'm doing it for myself or other people, I'm like, God, this is so wacky. But I've done it for so long now that I'm so I can't lie to myself. Like I'm so aware of I'm so aware of the difference between my imagination and information that I'm receiving.
Okay.
And frankly, the past life work is really fun. It's really fun because it's like, here's this other crazy story that at first glance has absolutely nothing to do with your life. Like, we're talking Ireland at 1637. You're on a hill with a woman and she pours milk on your head. And who knows, like, what the fuck does it have to do? Like, I'm trying to get a job. And then, like, as you let the story unfold, you start, like, you see the links between this and the life that you're living, and it's crazy. And it's so cool. And I do some past life work in Journey for clients, but I have started trying to coach people in doing past life work for themselves, because it brings together really, really, the way I do it, brings together some really good skills. One, trusting yourself. Actually trusting and just going along with the information.
That is really, I think, the hardest thing with a lot of this stuff. I don't know. Like, personally, I don't, like, it's just the terror of just like, no, that's not a ghost. You're just crazy. And, like, having to separate that out.
For sure, which is why it's a thrill for me. It's literally a thrill to sit with someone and provide them with prompting questions while they're in what is, frankly, a fairly light trance state, watching them navigate this and watching them learn what I learned and allowed to become extremely natural for me years ago. Navigate this storyline, engage these characters, and transform this story that in some way is still happening in their life. That's one skill. their intuition and self-trust. The other one is psychopomp work. To me, a well-resolved past life is fully resolved once the original players have been crossed over. So if I was an evil priest at Teotihuacan who raped and pillaged everyone, sure, I might have to resolve the past life and tell a new story there, but also I need to find that soul and convince him to cross over to really resolve the healing. That's a huge piece to me of past life healing.
So I'm not terribly familiar with past life healing, so I'm baby questions, baby steps here. The soul of a past life it's you, but it can also be moved on?
Yeah, so there is someone else, I'm sure, who could do better and speak more clearly to whatever cosmology I'm hinting at here. But sure, you reincarnate. But I think that the majority of us are reincarnating, and pieces of us are still, there's 0.001% of you that's still in Rome 530 AD.
Okay.
That's still there. So moving on that soul is bringing that back, that 0.001% of you. Or resolve.
Okay. That makes... So, this might be a bad analogy, but it's sort of like the Jet Li movie, The One. But more serious and important than that.
I've seen that. I want to now, though.
Okay, so when you're doing this for someone else, is it a question of just sort of going into the trance, finding the information, just telling them, or are you sort of holding their hand on a sort of journey through things? Like, what is that process like?
Well, I do it both ways. I do it both ways. I do though. I might be in. I might, if I'm delivering a journey to someone via recording, then when it's me doing it for someone. There's always some follow-up actions for them to do, because to me, trance is great and sexy and effective, and if it's not grounded in the real world, then fuck it.
Okay.
So if there's past life resolution work that shows up in a client session, there's always at least one action for that person to take in the real world to solidify this shift. But I haven't actually put on my website yet, but my spirits are pushing me to do more past life coaching work, and that would be me holding someone's hand, providing prompting questions and suggestions, hearing them tell the story of a past life energy that needs to be resolved, and me holding space for that and helping them get to the other side. And I've done it for a few people, and it's been really cool to get the feedback from them, because it's like, hey, I'm no longer a wounded soldier in Vietnam, whatever. And at the end, they're like, it makes sense. They're like, okay, that was cool. But then, a few weeks later, they're like, my entire relationship with my family changed. What the fuck? In a good way,
Yeah, that's really marvelous.
Cool shit.
I mean, it sounds like it. Can I ask you, so you got an MA in performance studies at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
Does that inform your shamanic practice at all? Or any of your really spiritual practices? Because, I mean, I feel like the idea of inhabiting a character or something like that, like in performance, inhabiting the space of a performance and inhabiting a sort of spiritual space, there feel like there are parallels there, but I don't know. Do you find that at all? For
sure. I mean, what my academic background allows me to do is talk crazy in a different way. Okay. But in a way that's also really enjoyable and meaty and delicious to me. I love books. I haven't, I've been so deep in practice for a while that I haven't had as much fun time to really explore as much academia over the past few years, as much as I'd like to go back to it. Mm-hmm. Performance studies particularly is what I call, first of all, I'll say this, to me, the political is highly spiritual. Issues of colonization are spiritual. Issues of cultural exchange and interconnection are all really, really spiritual. And performance studies itself as a field, I was a fan of calling it secular queer animism. Because performance studies as a field is pretty much saying that everything is a performer. It actually, sure, it includes actual performance practice in it, but it's much more a weird blend of sociology and anthropology and media studies. And it's this idea that, this jar is performing on me aesthetically, and what we're doing, what's the history of this kind of, idea that everything is performing on you. And when it hit me, I was like, it was probably about like a few months into the program, I was like, wait, this is just animism. And there's just animism with jargon, with crazy jargon. And also, like, there was in performance studies, there is a big emphasis on queer theorists and queer writers and queer theory and queer time, which all really ends up just being indigenous cosmology, frankly. But it's, the economy is sexy, alas. I myself am seduced.
That's really, God, that's so lovely. Actually, since you bring up this idea of performance studies as queer animism, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you mentioned it, we brought it up before a little bit, but like the unnamed path, because that is, I believe, the sort of header is shamanism for men who love men.
Yeah, I would call it a shamanic witchcraft tradition for men who love men. Eddie is amazing, and I love him, and I miss him a lot, and he was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Okay. And any new tradition is rough. New tradition is rough. And it's a very unique time for all spiritualities, especially, I think, a spirituality that's trying to bring together men from under different cultural backgrounds together to heal themselves and possibly be conduits to healers. I've had some really unique experiences in the tradition. Eddie's right. There are these conduits of energy, there absolutely is a conduit of energy that runs through a certain kind of man or a person that I think is a strong link to this tradition, or at least that this tradition can hold space for. To me, what stands out the most about the tradition, my experience of it, is the idea of the ancestors of men who love men. That there is a great bonfire in the underworld that the naked men are all dancing around, and they are healthy and they are bright, and they are, waiting for us to come to them so they can give us medicine and so that we can dance with them. It's interesting, even as I'm saying this right now, having myself not been as engaged with the tradition in a few years, just thinking about dance and joy as liberatory technologies and ideas, and how vital they've been to like oppressed and marginalized groups.
Keep going.
Oh, sorry. I recently learned about disco and like where disco went, and it was just like certain demographics hated the joy. They hated the black and brown and joy, and they needed to kill it. There was just too much fucking freedom going on here. And I guess that's interesting. Sure, there are various technologies in the tradition and secret technologies in the tradition, but like really like a mainstay that Eddie was always teaching was there are these men, they're dancing around this bonfire in the underworld. Go dance with them.
That's really beautiful. I love that. That kind of reminds me of there's a quote I heard from someone who wasn't sure they were getting it right, from I think the poet Hafiz. That's just, my God only says 4 words, come dance with me, which is, I don't know. It's just do you incorporate dance at all into your, like when you're doing like client work or shamanic work? Do you ever get people up and moving about, or would that hinder the trance or something like that?
I prescribe dance actions sometimes. I don't always know whether or not a client is going to do it. I prescribe dance actions, especially when an animal helping spirit has come through, because animal helping spirits really want to be embodied. Animals are great because they never have to worry about being themselves. We humans make shit really complicated.
Boy, howdy.
So when an animal helping spirit, so when an animal helping spirit steps forward, what you have is this ally who is not questioning, well, what does it mean to giraffe? Like, no, bitch, be tall.
Yeah.
Bitch, see everything. Just do it. Like, so, taking in that perspective, we could light candles around pictures of giraffes and chant giraffe and hug a giraffe and get a giraffe pelt and all these occult things. Or we could dance giraffe. We could invite this giraffe energy to move into our bodies and show me, where am I being stupid? Where am I? Show me the parts of me that are standing in the way. Because it's all embodied. Show me the parts of me that are standing in the way of your medicine. Show me the parts of me that, and when you're dancing an animal helping spirit, it's not going to look like, it's going to look like you lying on the floor and your hip repeatedly hitting the floor in a really awkward position until that part of you loosens up. And then you say, oh my God, giraffe just moved into me much more easily now. I got rid of that thing. And okay, you're getting it. There's this embodied wisdom that can come through dance and movement. I often share the story of one of my helping spirits is a dragonfly, and I met him at a workshop that was about meeting one of the spirits in charge of your, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, I didn't expect it to be dragonfly. And, we made masks in the workshop, and I'm dancing the dragonfly. And dragonfly is giving me all this information about itself that I did not know. Like, I checked on Wikipedia later, and I was blown away. Dragonflies are fucking badass predators.
Oh, they're terrifying.
They're fucking terrifying. I had no idea. And as I'm dancing this dragonfly says, through my body, why don't you just take what nourishes you? At the time, I was dealing with such terrible boundaries, such issues of scarcity, and to have that move, if it had said it to me at an altar or shrine, it would have been like interesting. But to be dancing this fierce being who sent that message through my body, I just immediately started fucking weeping.
That's amazing.
So I often recommend movement for animal helping spirit work as well as shadow work. Shadow is another thing that is a heavily embodied issue, the heart issue and an embodiment issue, and we tend to make it about the mind and goth clothing. But the shadow parts is really also really the beasties.
For folks who are listening and who don't know what shadow work is, what's a good, quick kind of handhold onto the idea of shadow work?
To me, shadow work is, the shadow is parts of you that you no longer have access to, but they have access to you. And no amount of intentions or conscious ideas, no, you're wrong. If you think you've got a handle on your shadow, you're wrong. You don't. It has a handle on you. Why? Because these are parts of you that you have sent to your unconscious. Mm. And they need to be, because they're now in the unconscious, they need to be skillfully and cleverly retrieved. And then if you retrieve them, they have to be turned into allies. You have to heal them and then integrate them. If I locked you in a closet for 30 years because I thought, oh my God, like if I have this guy hanging around, like I'll die. Like no one can be this powerful. I can't carry around this amount of feminine power in the world. Look what happened to Amelia Earhart. I'll die. No, I'm going to cut this piece off of me, shove it in the closet,
right.
And now every time I get drunk, twisted Amelia Earhart is like, you're going to say all this evil shit to your friend. You're going to get blasted drunk. You're not going to remember any of it. Can't believe that I said all those things. That's shadow. And then if I wouldn't rescue you out of that closet, you wouldn't like me very much, though. And you wouldn't be very pretty. So there's a process of healing and facing the original fear that led you to put it away in the first place.
Yeah, a reconciliation.
The various techniques, absolutely, a reconciliation. There's various techniques to me that I've been through about 3 different shadow processes, kinds of shadow processes, and I have my favorites, but I think something that we all need to understand a bit better for sure.
I actually forgot how we got onto shadow work just now, and now I feel like I've derailed us in the conversation.
I was talking about movement. That's how I
right. Yes, movement, and the introduction of animal spirits. So helping spirits. I mean, you've talked about the idea of plants having spirits, animals having spirits, but then helping spirits are also do they typically take the forms of, living beings that we would encounter on a day-to-day basis, even if, like, I think people might not, think of a basil plant having sentience, but it does to an extent in this understanding of the world. But, like, does it extend beyond that into, like, a whole cosmos of things, or does it sort of stay in the kingdoms of things we know are alive and can die?
Well, I guess helping spirits to me is very subjective. It's very subjective and personal. To me, some of my, I consider certain deities I work with to be certain, kinds of helping spirit. To me, I have certain animal helping spirits. Some of my ancestors have stepped out of the great ancestral Mailu to walk with me as specific helping spirits. So to me, helping spirits are energies that you're working with that are providing perhaps a certain level of guidance. And I have a really weird category in my head that I kind of call like working spirits. Okay. And those are the spirits that I'm putting in front of or, doing, various folk magic or occult practices. And some of those spirits walk that thin line, I can totally be in a deep trance state working on my shit and have, XYZ saint enter and say, hey kid, I'm going to help here. I guess I think of the helping spirits, I think of the energies that are especially helping you with your process.
Sort of keeping you safe as you undergo these moments of vulnerability.
Keeping you safe for like, I'll pull this string, but then you have to take this action to really unravel this piece, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Speaking of actions, when you prescribe a client an action after you work with them, what kinds of things are we talking about? Are we talking about, making a donation or doing some sort of charitable work to help people that represent people who you harmed in a past life? Or is it something more sort of personal and kind of, you have to do this for yourself or to yourself or something like that?
Oh, everything. Most of it's personal. I mean, I guess, at the end of the session, I have like two categories of follow-up information. One category is get these specific actions done. You told Hera that you're going to resolve this debt with her by writing a letter, by painting a picture about your mom's ancestral line. And that's what she said would resolve the debt that you have with her. We remove this entity, but there's still a little follow-up work, so you're going to take these 7 baths with these ingredients, or you're going to leap over a fire, or do a fire ritual. And, there's actions like that, and then there's actions like, or spells or things like that, and then there's actions like, we now know that these broad themes are relevant to your life, and I am begging you, practically, to please start finding vehicles for these broad themes. So we know that you've got these 3 specific actions you take, throw a stone in the river, blah, 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 but we also know that you're here to be a writer, and you have a deep relationship with children, please go find an avenue for that. Go read children's storybooks at story time at the library. Start writing a show. Start thinking. Don't forget these parts of you that we just remembered.
That's really. I love how broad that is and can be. I don't want to keep you for too long because I really appreciate the time you're taking to talk about these things. So before the pleasure is really it's all mine. This has been a wonderful revelatory moment. So I want to make sure we get to before all this shuts down. If people want to find more about you, or maybe get in contact, or maybe get one of your wonderful books that you've written, like where should they go? What should they do?
Oh yeah, well my books are on Amazon under Kai, Khi, Armand. My website is impactshamanism.com. Impact, IMPACT. I just started a YouTube channel. I'm going to try and keep that going a little bit better than my blog. So yeah, or you can always email me at info@impactshamanism.com. And I also am a little too into social media, so you can easily find me on Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah, your Twitter's great. Big fan of the Twitter. And actually, something you said that I feel like touches on this, that like, you said it, I think, after we set up this interview, and I was just like, oh, this is so great, this is so perfect. Like, it was something like, every time you're going through a difficult time in your life, think about, could this be an initiation? Could this be initiating you into something?
Oh, yeah, like, so, uh-huh.
Oh, sorry, please, go on.
knowing that you're going through an initiatory, period is to me very powerful. Coming especially from the root work tradition and conjure tradition being, one of my foundations, truly, magically, that's a tradition that's about control. That's a tradition about controlling your life, controlling your environment, controlling your circumstances, and overcoming. High John the Conqueror, we're talking about overcoming. And given the history of the people who have Black people in America, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it was really a kick in the face when I was encountering things that I could not, and that these practices of conquering and stopping and thwarting and putting under your foot were not going to be helpful for me and frankly, thank God they wouldn't have been, because that would have stopped my growth.
Right.
There were things I had to endure. There were times where I had to recognize that whoever I am right now is stagnant and is no longer fit for what's next. And various energies in my life are colluding to ensure that I die so I can be something new. And they're because I love you. That's what's happening. And it doesn't have to be a spirit. It doesn't have to be a mambo or an ungan. It's life too. It's your house burned down. It's your parents got divorced. It's you're going through a divorce. You're going through a divorce and you're moving. And really, to me, you generally know or can know when it's initiatory when it's too many things at once. When it's too many things at once, then you can turn to divination and being like, it's always the question, am I cursed? And one might be. That does not necessarily mean that you're not going through an initiatory period. I'm absolutely going through an initiatory period that included people cursing me as part of, but with the knowledge of, but whoever I'm going to be in a few months is not going to be vulnerable to this anymore.
So it's sort of like an inoculation almost.
Yeah, you're becoming something new. So all good deaths are about.
That's a really lovely note. I'd almost want to end it there, but there is something that you reminded me of something that I want to ask you about, which is when we talk about the necessary work that needs to happen to decolonize, honestly, our culture, our world in various ways. What role do you think shamanism might be able to play in decolonizing either just magic or magic specifically, or like the world at large in general?
Well, for one, I think it's necessary that we contact and engage pre-colonial ancestors who have a totally different perspective on how this is supposed to be, on how to move through the world, or what it means to be a human being. Contacting and engaging them, embodying them, dancing them. I think that's big. I think that communal rituals of cleansing and intrusion removal and grieving. Colonization, our particular brand of it is so individualistic and so material focused. And it's sad, like at this point I get really jaded every time I see some article that's just like obviously so symptomatic, just like addiction really is about childhood trauma, and if we as a society are going to face this, my brain goes, obviously we're going to talk about this now because white people are becoming addicted to opioids at a level that and so there's jade level 1. Jade level 2 is maybe if you didn't destroy communities and families to begin with, all the loss of connection that leads to addiction. So to me, I think that the ways in which shamanic healing offers us a perspective that's just so at odds with this thing, when someone leaves a session with me, they suddenly remember, oh yeah, I am a writer. I need to go write. I need to go be with writers. I need to go engage in the world in a different way. I think that shamanic healing is constantly asking us engage in the world with the world in a different way, and I think that's really what decolonization is about.
That's marvelous. I think we can end there, honestly. That's a really great point for moving forward. Oh, actually, wait, one last thing, and then I'll let you go live your life as you've been doing. So let's say I'm somebody who's coming to this interview or this show. I don't have a lot of experience. I don't know a lot of things about magic, but I'm curious. I'm interested. I want to, start from level 0 and do something right now to either engage with myself spiritually, cleanse something, heal something. Like I might be asking too big of a thing from you right now, and that's totally fine if I say like, no, it can't be. But like, what's a small thing? Someone is new. They want to really like put their toe in the warm healing springs of this. What's a quick or even low barrier to entry sort of thing they could try?
Sure. Go get a glass and go to your sink and pour some water into the glass and go outside and pour the water on the ground and say, this is an offering for my helping spirits. This is an offering for the energy that have been supporting me, that have been supporting and protecting me. I might not know your names. I might not know what you look like. I might not know what you like. But this is just a simple libation with a heartfelt thank you for your support. I'm calling you in. I look forward to learning about you, pouring the water on the ground.
Love it. Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a joy, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
Thank you so much to Chiron. That was such a wonderful conversation. If you'd like to learn more about him and the things he does, you should go to Impact Shamanism. And this has been Witchhassle. If you want to ever submit a listener question or just get in touch, head on over to cooperwilhelm.com/witchhassle or the show's Instagram or Twitter accounts, both of which are @witchhassle, or you can go to patreon.com/witchhassle to submit questions to our research department and also to, support the show if you want to and get yourself a few little fun goodies. The show is now on iTunes, so if you want to leave a review or some stars there, I'm told that is helpful to shows for being found by potential listeners. So, if you feel inclined, why not? No pressure. I'm not here to tell you what to do. Thank you so much for listening. Our theme music is performed by Sebastian Baverstam and was recorded by Edvard Lee. Good luck with the work ahead.